Good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me as a part of this panel. I was asked a couple of weeks ago to give a talk on elections and journalism in Egypt, and I agreed. And as I was on the flight coming over, I must admit to you, I was thinking, we've just had 530 death sentences given in one blow. We've just had the field marshal now nominating himself officially, and I'm thinking, what am I going to go and say? So, but perhaps it was those thoughts that bring us right into the crux of the matter. It's really about the context. And understanding Egypt and the electoral process and the role that journalism has played can only be understood when looking back at the big picture. That we have a revolutionary process since the 25th of January that has not just shaken Egypt, but the region and the world. That within that overall revolutionary process, we've had three main waves that have dramatically changed the way we thought things were going to move. And we've had all sorts of warring and differing factions taking over. We've had the Islamists, we've had the non-Islamists, we've had the army, we've had the old regime and all of its economic interests leveraging itself. We've had economic crisis, and in between and amongst all of that also a lot of social upheaval and security concerns. So that paints a picture of a context which is ever changing and is very difficult to predict, and accordingly also to navigate as journalists and also as people who are involved in the political development that has been happening since the 25th of Jan. So when we think of the kind of coverage we've been getting with regards to the elections in Egypt, I've been thinking, do they really talk about what the story really is? What we get our stories on, the violations, vote rigging, processes, a lot of more violations, the results, always the bottom line. All right, but we don't really get anything that explains why things are panning out this way, why people are making the decisions that they're making. Why is it that every time we walk into an election, we step out with a sense of shock? How is it that the results turned out this way? And so really what's happening here is that we're seeing that journalism is not playing its role in identifying stories that help us understand what the processes and the trends and the results, everything that leads up to that time when we have the elections and those violations and the rigging and the results. How is it that it's turning out this way? And accordingly, we are pretty much left in the dark as to how Egyptians vote and how these processes come to be. All right, so what are the sorts of questions that I think are very key that we're not getting any answers for? A lot of the same people who voted for the Muslim Brotherhood voted against them in the last constitutional referendum. Now, why is that in just under a year? Why are we getting that? Why in the wake of 25 Jan did we have people right after the revolution vote for the military constitutional referendum? Again, no good answers. Why is the big city vote so diametrically different from that of the countryside? Again, no good explanations. Now, this is a picture that shows the infamous state television building. And it's really, since 25 Jan, we've had people come up to this building chanting liars, liars, talking about how expressing this crisis that we've had of the mainstream media in Egypt. Their construct of the story is this. It's one very much conditioned, oddly enough, by what Western media says about what's happening in Egypt. There's always this reaction to what's being said in the Western media, and this is what the kind of story that we get is a response to that. It's a story about extreme political polarization, and they are really setting and fueling this frenzy in Egypt, which sees everything in black and white terms and nothing in between. And it is also a story of national crisis, and hence there is absolutely no room for anyone to differ. There has to be consensus. That is the construct of all of the media coverage that we get in the national media, vis-a-vis everything that happens, including elections. Now, that sort of brings us to why it is that it's sort of relevant that I'm the one who's making this presentation, because I represent an organization that does exactly the opposite. It is a community media organization which publishes 10 weeklies across the countries, and these are our labels. And they are based on young journalists who are working in not just publishing the print papers, but also working in video, online, social media. And what's really interesting about this and what's different about it is that these are groups of people, that these are newsrooms, that these are products that are accountable to their communities. They are identifiable by their communities, they are integrated into their communities, and they are answerable to them. They are not answerable to those people who are setting the story for the national media. And this is a big difference. Now, what is the story that they are finding is relevant to elections and to understanding all of the political processes and ups and downs that we've been seeing in Egypt? With regards to elections in particular, the big story is patronage. This is what is deciding how people are voting in a big part of the country, from Fayoum and Beni Suef, which is the southern part of Egypt, starting south of Cairo, all the way down to Aswan. It is the big families who are deciding how people are going to vote. And this is the story. Understanding these relationships is what is key to understanding how people are voting. But this is not a story that you're going to find in the national press. Okay. The other very important factor in deciding electoral results has been sectarian politics. And this is something no one really likes to talk about. It's a very sensitive topic, but it is key. A lot of the elections have been decided according to whether or not you wanted to give your vote to the church or to Islam. Are you going to uphold which religion? That was the question, and that was the campaigning, and that was how people were making their decisions in a big part of the country. So sectarian politics here is key. Writing stories about that helps us understand what's going on. It's also about people making rational decisions to make their daily lives manageable. And here, this is about civil society, not in terms of NGOs and organizations, but in terms of everyday relationships and how we manage them to leverage our needs. So if you don't have someone in parliament, if you don't have someone in government through your family who can help you get a job for your son, get your street paved, help you out in times of need at a hospital or, you actually can't survive. And so it's this mess. It gives order to this. And that conditions how people also function when it comes to elections. They're not voting really for political parties, and they're not really voting for ideological trends. They're voting in people who help them manage their lives. And that is a very rational decision. Now, in covering that story and understanding those dynamics is a very complex issue because it's a very sensitive one. And I would like to show you the experiences that some of the people that I work with have faced, especially since 30 June, in covering stories that relate to some of these issues that I've been sharing with you. Now, if you'll bear with me.
أنا كنت بصور فهم شافوا إن أنا إخوان وبصورهم أو تبع الشرطة وبسلمهم.
إحنا بالنسبة للأمن أعداء.
ممكن الأمن يتعمدك بإطلاق القنابل وسيل الدموع عليك.
في مجموعة من الشباب اتلعبوا عليا طبعا وتعمل إيه تصور اللي أنا صاحبي مفيش بقى الكلام ده يعني دلقوا عليا بنزين وكانوا عايزين يولعوا فيا.
قال لي لا أنت تبع مين وقعد يزعق وبعد كده رفع عليا المسدس.
احتجزت في بيت أحد الأهالي كنت مهدد بالسلاح.
في مظاهرة نسائية كبيرة موجودة هنا في دجلة فلقيت واحد بيشد مني الكاميرا من المايك فالمايك طلع في ايده.
الشهداء طلعوا من هذا على المحور كسروا اللابتوب بتاعي واستولوا على الكاميرا الخاصة بالمكتب.
حيث تفاجأ المتظاهرون بمجموعات من جماعة الإخوان المسلمين يقومون بمهاجمة المتظاهرين واعتدوا بالضرب على النساء والأطفال.
Okay, this is part of a project that we undertook to document the kinds of situations young journalists were facing on the ground outside of the capital city when trying to cover what's been happening in the country leading up to and during various elections. As you can see, it is an extremely volatile street, extremely complex, and these journalists are out there without any protection. And when you try and uphold an editorial line which is not in favor of one side or another, you're outside of the system, and you become fair game for everyone. So you find that you're being attacked by Muslim Brotherhood, you're being attacked by the army, you're being attacked by the police, and you're being attacked by everyone in the middle who just doesn't understand what it is that you're doing and why you're there. And so it becomes extremely complex to be able to actually cover these stories and be able to give clarity to them. I don't know how to... Sorry. So anyway, in considering what it is that these local journalists and other journalists working in Egypt need to do in order to be able to cover what's been happening, and in particular elections and all that leads up to it, we found in our experience that this is what we need to do. We need to be a part of our society. We need to be accountable to our readership. We need to be accountable to the truth, and that people over time understand the value of that, and that this is a hard and long road, but it is one that needs to be taken seriously if we're going to make inroads into this highly centralized media production system that we have currently running in the country. We also need to develop the skills and ethical framework that enable us to be able to, one, identify the stories that are important, and then be able to execute them. And here, I'm just going to have to mention it since I'm here in London. We get a lot of training support from various organizations, including UK-based organizations. And a lot of that which relates to improving skills for election coverage is actually irrelevant to the kinds of stories these people need to cover and the kinds of situations that they face on the ground. And this is something that really does need to be considered if we're going to help people to make inroads into the kind of coverage that dominates the scene now. Now, the final thing is sort of always to remember why it matters. Why is it that this coverage is important? Why do we need to give amplification to different stories that explain what's going on? I'm just going to show you a bit of this. These were images taken after the last referendum. We found in our central newsroom, we were getting these videos from all over the country of people dancing in front of the polling stations. Now, this is not to make little of the very serious challenges ahead of us, nor is it to make little of all of the great fears we have about what's happening now and the great challenges that are part of that. But sort of to amplify the fact that people are going to elections, they are a part of the political process. Journalism is a part of this for a reason. They're doing this because they're searching for self-realization, because they're looking for a better today. They're trying to make for themselves happier tomorrow, and that it is our duty as journalists working on the ground within this to help them do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fatemah. Before we move on to Michaela, just one question. You said at the beginning there was a Western construct of what's going on in Egypt. What is it that you're fighting against? You know, what's the dominant narrative out there?
You know, the dominant narrative is, first it was, we have to defend the SCAF, the military council, against what was being perceived, what was being shown in the West to be, this is anti-democratic, etc. Then when the Ikhwan came into power and we had the process of 30 June, the story was how, and I get this a lot, I mean, Egypt is in this downward spiral. It's a great crisis. You know, whenever we go to these conferences, whenever you read, just today, the editorial of the Washington Post, Egypt has been going down since 25 Jan. This is how the West frames the story. Egypt is in a perpetual state of disaster because it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. It doesn't go to elections and then accept those results and then continue. It doesn't abide by sort of the protocols that seem to be accepted as being those that are democratic. And hence, it is not democratic. And hence, it is going down the drain. But that's not necessarily the story as we see it from the ground. It is a much more complex story than that, and it's one that moves in waves, and it's one that needs to be contextualized. You don't get the contextualization in the Western media. And what happens is in the state media and in the national media, it follows the same. It follows the same, and it's constantly in reaction as well to what's being said in the West. So if the West is saying this is a coup, the big story in Egypt is that it is not a coup. But, you know, perhaps that's not the issue at all. You know, perhaps there's something much more complex that as local media professionals, we should be concentrating on.
Okay.